Recently, I noticed that Mad Little Pixel put out a video discussing elitism and gatekeeping in the retro gaming community. Now, he's not the first person to do this, as RGT85 and Lady Decade released some videos a while back calling out this phenomenon, as well as others in recent times. They're not the only ones either. However, it is a little unusual to see Mad Little Pixel talking about something like this. He's usually pretty chill and focuses more on new products like emulation handhelds and controllers. Regardless, all of these videos I saw centered on one particular example of elitism: hardware elitism, attacking people because they're playing on a less than ideal setup. Whether it be someone playing on a flat screen TV instead of a CRT, somebody playing on a single board computer instead of a MiSTER FPGA, or just playing on anything that's not the original console. Now, I agree that this is counterproductive and turns people away. That's been discussed a lot already. However, as somebody who is about playing classic games, collecting these old games here and there, and has uploaded plenty of playthroughs done with no continues or cheats, I want to give my own take as to why this elitism is not just rude, but also completely foolish and leads to bad advice for the average retro gamer and newcomers. One of the biggest reasons why I think the hardware elitism in this community is stupid is because the average retro gamer probably doesn't care or notice the benefits of original hardware, CRTs, and FPGA consoles. The average gamer can't feel input lag unless it gets bad, like 6 frames or more bad. They probably won't be able to tell the difference between 2 frames of lag or 3 to 4 frames. If you are a competitive player, that might be a different story. But the overwhelming majority of gamers are nowhere near that level of play. I've one credit cleared some hard shmups, a genre more sensitive to lag than others, and I usually can't tell the difference when it's below 5 or 6 frames. Emulation has gotten a lot better as well, like Mad Little Pixel brought up in one of his recent videos. Modern emulators in most cases do not have a significant amount of extra latency. They just don't. For example, the average person would have a very hard time telling apart Same Boy from MiSTER FPGA for Game Boy emulation. If you are the type that is more sensitive to input lag, RetroArch has a feature called Run Ahead to address this. If you're on a RetroPie setup on a Raspberry Pi and you're having to use, let's say, older versions of SNES-9X to play Super Nintendo games as another example, you might not even notice much of a difference between that and the real thing, or a gaming PC running better emulators like BSNES or Higgin. I would notice the sound being a bit worse compared to later versions of SNES-9X, for example, but honestly, it's not bad outside of that. Not everyone is super sensitive to emulation quality compared to the real thing. The input latency debate between emulation and real hardware or FPGA is actually kind of similar to the debate over audio quality from MP3s versus lossless audio. Is it true that there is a difference between 300 kilobit MP3s and FLAC? Yes, but good luck noticing it a lot of the time. Even though I've recorded my own music in the past, I have a hard time telling the difference a lot of the time outside of some subtle things that might not necessarily impact my overall opinion of the music itself. This is especially true comparing 320 kilobit MP3s versus FLAC. Plus, a band like Nickelback is still going to sound like Nickelback at the end of the day regardless of the format. In a lot of ways, it's the same thing with input latency unless it's an extreme case where it's super obvious. If a game has bad controls in the first place, going down from 4 frames to 3 frames is not going to save it. Kid Icarus on NES, for example, isn't going to have great controls all of a sudden with the right setup. Even if it's a good game, going down from 4 frames to 3 frames probably isn't going to make you better at it. Now, I don't want to spend too much time talking about my own playthroughs, but I typically do them on emulators unless it's a game off of Steam. From personal experience playing challenging games, if you're struggling at a particular game, it's probably because you're just not good enough yet to beat it. You need to practice a bit harder. I don't blame emulation for my problems and struggles beating games. That's not to say that other things can't help you depending on the game, like the right controller. I improved at shmups once I switched over to the right arcade stick setup because it helped with ergonomics compared to playing on controller. and my inputs got more accurate over time, but a lot of shmups originated in arcades anyway, so an arcade stick setup made sense from that standpoint as well. Plus, I still had to learn those games. There is no substitute for practice at the end of the day. Another reason why this kind of elitism is dumb is because not everyone has a lot of money to spend on physical games and hardware, or the space at home to store all the stuff necessary for an ideal retro setup. For a lot of systems, as I mentioned in a recent video about buying games on eBay, the prices for SNES games and some other systems is insane right now. Prices are not going down for a lot of older games, or at least not enough. And from a hardware standpoint, even the consoles have gone up in price, especially for old ones that are in good condition. Even if you want something like a MiSTER FPGA setup, that stuff is really expensive as well because you need to buy quite a few extra things beyond the main DE10 Nano board in order to get up and running. That's not even getting into inflation that's going on in the real world. With regards to CRTs, they are heavy, especially the larger ones, and you really can't watch TV anymore on them without converter boxes. The really nice ones have also shot up in price over time because of hardcore retro gamers. Plus, the average person who wants to go back and play some old games may not feel like getting the old TV out, even if they still have one somewhere. They already have a flat screen TV out in the living room or the bedroom. They're going to use that first most of the time, particularly if we're talking about average gamers. Another thing is that not everyone wants to have shelves upon shelves full of classic games, nor do a lot of people have the space for that in the first place. If you have that luxury, good for you, but that's not viable for many gamers. Plus, not everyone wants to spend the time and money modding an old console with RGB or HDMI, or they might not have the know-how to be able to do that kind of stuff. Even if you don't want to play with old cartridges, the original cartridges that is, EverDrive cartridges, they allow you to load many games off of a microSD card, but they're not cheap either. At some point, physical consoles and games go bad, so that's another big fallacy of this elitism. Nothing lasts forever. While cartridges tend to last a long time if taken care of, the batteries holding your save files are going to go bad. Also, CDs and DVDs have already been shown to be much less reliable in the long run than cartridges. Disc-based consoles can start developing problems reading discs, even if the disc is still good. You even have to worry about the capacitors going bad and killing old systems. This has been a big problem for the original Xbox, though other systems have fallen victim to this as well. A lot of people are not going to feel comfortable soldering on some new capacitors for an older console. For handhelds, you have to worry about the quality of the screen, especially if you're talking about the Game Gear and the Atari Lynx. My Atari Lynx is in terrible shape, and because of that alone, I just prefer playing those games now on emulators at this point. Even if money isn't a factor in repairing your stuff, that's still time if you've lost. Not exactly a good way to sell people on retro gaming strictly on original hardware in the longer run. Your original controllers won't last forever either, and yes, I know that even good aftermarket controllers can have issues matching up to the original ones, but at some point you don't have many other options. Real hardware is not that convenient for recording footage either. Emulation has made it possible for me to gather gameplay footage quickly and easily. Otherwise, you've got to buy capture cards just to record on real hardware properly, and those cards are not exactly cheap, especially for the good ones. A lot of us just don't want to fool with all that hassle. The next big problem with a lot of the gatekeeping and elitism in the retro gaming community is that it's not about the games after a certain point. For a certain portion of the community, it has become, hey, look at me and my shelves of games. Look at my NES hooked up to my Sony Trinitron. Look at my Sega Saturn collection. Hey, my CRT setup is looking better than your cheap flat screen. Honestly, how is this much different or better than some bikini model showing off on Instagram or some rich dude showing off some Lamborghinis? It's really not. At a certain point, it's just self-centered behavior. And look, everyone's self-centered to some extent. We're all guilty of being selfish in some way. The problem here is that we're supposed to be a community that got into these games because we loved playing these games. We grew up playing video games. We didn't get into this to be obsessing about our collections or our setups. For some people, this need to have a large collection of games can be super unhealthy. I met a guy a couple of years ago that used to have a complete collection of the North American Sega Dreamcast library, complete in the box. He told me that he had to sell most of that collection a while back because he was short on money, but when he was collecting it had become an obsession, an addiction practically, because he was calling stores all over the place in order to find the games that he was missing, and that was all he was thinking about for the most part. He kept a few games here and there that were his favorites, but he felt enslaved by that big collection, and he felt a lot more free after he got rid of most of it. I think we need to get back to focusing more on playing games rather than showing them off on social media or showing off our setups. Playing the games and having fun is supposed to be the reason we're gamers, not to look cool or be some sort of influencer. Just because some YouTubers have shelves of games doesn't mean that you need that as well. Instead, beat some of those games in your backlog. Maybe recommend a good old school game to others. Talk about a classic game that you just discovered recently. All of these are much better options than attacking people for not playing quote unquote the right way. One thing that's a bit more subjective to discuss here, but I think is still an issue, is the fact that this elitism sometimes props up an idea of nostalgia that wasn't reality for a lot of gamers back in the day. This is especially true when we start talking about higher-end CRT TVs and monitors. The average gamer was probably playing on a pretty lousy consumer CRT back in the day. They might have even connected their consoles via RF adapters, resulting in a blurrier image. I know I used RF adapters for my consoles until Generation 7. Almost no one had, let's say, a Sony Trinitron back then, and the people who had them, they weren't using them to play Super Nintendo or Sega Genesis games. Plus, some people don't even think those PVMs are worth it, but the prices for them are quite high nowadays regardless. Now yes, there are legitimate benefits for CRTs. Lower latency is one of them, which I've already brought up, so if you're a professional NES Tetris player or a Super Mario Bros. Speedrunner, for example, you might want to play on real hardware in a CRT. If you want to play Duck Hunt or some other light gun game on NES or some other console before the Wii, those games don't function properly on modern TVs, so yes, that's a good use case. However, not everyone needs a CRT to experience nostalgia. Nostalgia can just be playing the classics any way you want. It doesn't have to involve a PVM that's much nicer than what you had growing up. Last, I want to end things by talking about the fact that the elitism and gatekeeping have become a marketing tactic for some companies in the retro gaming world. In particular, DKOldies, the biggest locale in retro gaming besides water grading, is resorting to gatekeeping to stay relevant. Here's what they said recently on Facebook. Watch out this Christmas because fake retro consoles and illegal emulators are popping up, even on legit websites. Don't be fooled. Nothing beats the authentic experience we're all about at DKOldies. Remember the hum of a real console or the feel of an actual game cartridge? That's what makes gaming special. One of our team members was reminiscing about the first time he played the Wii with his grandmother. She loved bowling. It's memories like those that make video games so special. So what's your best authentic memory with a real deal video game? Let's stick together and celebrate true gaming this holiday season. What a bunch of gobbledygook. That post screams out desperation. Now there are some fake retro consoles out there on Amazon and elsewhere that suck. A little bit of truth there obviously. However, these guys have been proven to be just as fake, if not more fake, because they have a long history of claiming to refurbish their stuff when they actually don't. They don't have any room to talk here. Also, the games are special because people play them and enjoy them. That's why they have value, not because they're physical things you can grab and hold in your hands. But why would they think that gatekeeping is a viable marketing tactic? Because some people are really like that in the retro gaming community, and there might even be some casuals that believe this stuff as well. If that type of messaging didn't appeal to anyone at all, they wouldn't be making those kinds of posts. Granted, it won't be enough to grow their business and save their reputation, but they're still going to try it. At the end of the day, they just want to sell you overpriced classic games and consoles through nostalgia. They're preying on your nostalgia through gatekeeping of all things and hoping you'll fall for it. They don't care about the condition of the stuff they sell most of the time. They don't care about latency. They don't care about how these games look on an old TV. They only care about delivering a good experience if they know they're selling to a bigger YouTuber, because they've gotten so much negative attention and negative videos about them and their failures at this point. They've had so many fails that they somehow made Review Tech USA of all channels grow again in subscribers earlier this year, and other bigger YouTubers took advantage of this drama as well. I'm also amazed by how many subscribers DKOldies has on YouTube, but then again, their shorts game is pretty strong even though their actual videos don't draw a whole lot of views. But anyways, stay away from companies preying on your nostalgia like this, especially if they're gatekeeping that hard and have a terrible reputation. So to wrap things up, the elitism is not just bad because it's rude and turns people away. It also leads to people overspending on things that they may not benefit from in order to chase this idea of nostalgia that they didn't actually experience growing up. And not everyone in the community is like this, of course, but this is an issue. But anyways, I want to hear from you. What do you think of the retro gaming community today? Have you experienced any elitism or gatekeeping? Let me know in the comments. If you enjoyed this video, hit the like button and subscribe for more commentaries like this, as well as playthroughs of classic games done without continues or cheats. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you again soon.